It's often said that men only care about one thing, or men are dogs, and many other phrases like that to mean that men place the expectation of physical intimacy over that of all else. But how true is that? And what more can there be said on the topic? Hey everyone, my name is Christian Verstappen, and I have a lot to say about many things. I want to talk about men and intimacy. There's this video that Trever Noah did recently from his talk show, The Daily Show with Trever Noah, where he went into specifics on this concept. And I like Trever Noah for the most part. I do. I think he's got a lot of good things to say. I understand his views on different things. When it comes to relationships, though, he had another clip that went viral a while ago in regards to how he doesn't want to live with another partner. He said, essentially, he doesn't think that it would be healthy necessarily to live with somebody else. And I can understand where he's coming from with these things, but I'm not sure he necessarily has the best ideas when it comes to relationships overall. However, like I said, I think he's a good guy. I do value his opinion on different things, and I think it would be good to go over this. When I started watching this video before, I said, yep, I gotta go over this. So here we go.
Did you see this thing today? I think it was trending for a moment on Twitter about like the right to sex. Did you see this? Did anyone? Did you see this? It was one of the wildest conversations people were having, and I think part of it came down to bad branding or whatever. But essentially, I think there was a Washington Post article that came out saying that men in their 30s are having less sex than ever before, in history. Just men are not having and I think it was framed as, and forgive me, but I'm paraphrasing, it was like framed as they're not having enough sex or not having as much sex as they would like to have, and the number has gone down dramatically over the past few decades. And so obviously that study came out, and I was reading that, and the first thing I thought was like, well, you don't know how much people are having sex. You know how much people told you they're having sex. That's the first thing. But even if it is true, it was interesting to see the conversations that came afterwards, because then some people were saying, this is why we need to have a right to sex in this country. You need to have a right to sex. No, and I think it got, that's why I say bad branding. I think what some people were saying was, we need to decriminalize sex work in America and in the world because we've created these structures that now make people ashamed, and that conversation, I don't even think I'm, close to being qualified to speak on. I think sex workers have actually started many great conversations around how they think the industry should be formalized and changed.
Yeah, so real quick on that, I do want to just very quickly say that sex work is work, and there's a very good video by Philosophy Tube that delves into this. I could spell. I still didn't spell it right. Here we go. Sex Work by Philosophy Tube. I do absolutely agree with everything that they said in this, and yeah, it's a very well done video. I highly recommend checking it out if you're curious on the concept of sex work specifically and things of that nature.
But what I did find was, I found it interesting how the framing always talks about men and sex alone. No, but it never talks about two things. One, very seldom in society do we talk about how the expectation of sex was often set by a society controlled by men, and women were just subject to it, And as that has changed, you would hope that now the dynamics would change. But it also makes it seem so one-dimensional. They go like, women, men aren't having the sex that they want to have or wish to have. And I go like, how much sex do they think they're supposed to have? Let's start there. Secondly, do they think they're entitled to the sex? And third, and most importantly for me, and I really feel like we don't speak about this enough, is people don't realize how often men are experiencing a lack of intimacy. And the only place that they can experience that intimacy is through sex. We've created a society where men are so afraid to be vulnerable with each other, to be, sensitive with each other, to care for each other, to love each other. Even saying that as a guy, you always have to change and be like, you can't just say, I love you. You have to be like, I love you, dog. You know what I mean? You got to throw it, like you can't just say it. And it's interesting because that is where I do feel women have done a much better job of being there intimately for each other. Not sexually, but intimately. And I think we take for granted how much in society men who say sex is the thing they're not getting are actually struggling with a lack of companionship, of intimacy, of being in a space with a person where they're sharing, you know, everything from serotonin to endorphins to what humans need to feel, you know. And I hope we can change that conversation just a little bit more. I hope we get to the place where guys go, oh, I actually didn't need the sex. I needed to be held. And I live in a society where it's hard to be held unless I'm having sex. Because as guys, you can't just go to a guy and be like, just hold me.
So, okay, I wanna get into a few things here because I've just let this video go on and on and haven't really given my thoughts on the matter. So I do want to give my thoughts on the matter. You'll note the reason I haven't really kind of stopped him yet is because I don't disagree with the majority of the conclusion that he's come to and what he's discussing, what he's going over with all of this. However, I don't really like the way that he's framing some things, because what he's essentially saying, and to an extent this is true, that men say they want more sex, but really what we're craving is intimacy. And the thing is, for many people, for myself it was this way, it can be both. See, I was in a relationship with a woman who I very much loved, and ultimately what I felt that I was lacking from her was intimacy. And this was emotional intimacy, but it was also sexual intimacy. I'm not saying necessarily that what Trever is saying here is wrong. The point that he's making is absolutely correct. However, my issue with it is it kind of pushes aside an entire demographic of people where maybe sex is still something that a lot of people are looking for. I also don't like how these kind of issues are always framed as men are the ones that are always craving physical. It's basically like men are craving physical intimacy from their partner, and women are craving emotional intimacy. I think a lot of the times, if intimacy is lacking in a relationship, it can be one or the other. Most human beings crave emotional and physical intimacy. I've gone on record before, and I will say many times, I'm sure, that I personally am very emotionally as well as sexually driven. In a relationship for myself, I definitely need to be with somebody where we match each other on that level, especially emotionally and sexually. Everything else is just a friend or a roommate, or God forbid, a mother. And I don't need those things from that partner. I mean, I want my partner to be my best friend as well, don't get me wrong. But when people discuss these issues and they try to say that, oh well, men, it's not really sex that men are missing, or maybe they'll even say the same thing for women, or anybody of any gender. Most people of all genders, of all ethnicities, sexualities, everything. Well, not all sexualities, because ace, but most people absolutely desire and crave physical intimacy as well as emotional intimacy. There are people who only want physical intimacy, and there are people who only want emotional intimacy, and there are people who don't want either. But there's nothing wrong, no matter where you land on that spectrum, because just with many things in life, it is a spectrum. Most people, even somebody like me, who definitely would say that I have a very high libido, aren't so far on one side of the spectrum or so far on the other side of the spectrum where, like, I'm not so far that, like, that's the only thing that matters. And most people who have a lower libido aren't so far that they're completely repulsed by sex altogether. There are people that are, of course, but most people fit somewhere in the middle of this spectrum. And I think it's important to and I think it's important to really delve into this mentality, because while it is true that the emotional intimacy, just wanting to, I mean, look, I'm someone who I love cuddling and just hand holding and just even just kind of sitting in silence with your partner and just admiring each other's company and just spending time together, all those different things. Those are all great. But I also find that the more I'm attracted to my partner, and especially once I've fallen in love with them, the more I crave them physically as well. The problem with this kind of narrative is it kind of continues to push this idea that if you are somebody who is of a higher libido, you're the problem. Because there is absolutely a stigma that society puts on people with high libidos. There's the stigma that people with high libidos can't be trusted, they're going to cheat because they can't be satisfied by one partner, or maybe they're horrible people that will only use people for physical pleasure and not want anything to do with them otherwise. Things like that. And these are harmful narratives to push, because just like people anywhere else on the spectrum, sexually or otherwise, it is still valid. Of course, as long as everything is consensual and respectful and all of that good stuff, that's what matters. But my issue with the language, not what he's saying, but the language that he's using and the idea that it's very easy to get from what he's saying, is that it kind of puts men, especially, in a place to say, oh, it's not really the physical aspect of sex that I want, it's the emotional aspect. Well, it can be both. This is almost like saying, okay, I'll give an example. It's like anything else, right? If you would say, oh, we realize people aren't worried that they're not making enough money to, survive and live comfortably. People are actually worried that they don't have a job that's fulfilling. Well, it can be both. People want a job that provides them money, as well as a job that is fulfilling. And it's the same way in a relationship. Most people want want a relationship where they are emotionally and sexually satisfied, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it's just an issue that I have with this language, is it kind of vilifies, and I do keep saying men, but really anybody um, that would listen to this message, no matter what their gender, could absolutely. It just kind of perpetuates that idea that, like, oh, it's not really the sex that you want. You want this thing, and you're using sex to get to it. Well, you could want the sex too. A lot of women especially struggle with this, especially women who have high libidos, where they think that they are broken because society tells women they have to be these chaste, prudish angels, while men are supposed to be these dogs. And the reality is, there are going to be women who are absolutely, high libido people that want to have sex quite often, and there are going to be those who are more naturally chaste. And there are going to be the same thing with men who are naturally more high libido or naturally lower libido. And all of these things, and any in between, are completely valid. And obviously, this applies for trans people and non binary people, anywhere across the sexuality spectrum, the gender identity spectrum. This applies to anyone, period. So I do think that Trevor means well, and I think when people have these discussions, they mean well. But I just want to really delve into that type of language and explain how important it is to understand that while what he's saying is true, some of that language can be interpreted in an uncharitable way to people who do have high libidos and also want the sex. And to be clear, if you are somebody who only wants the emotional aspect of a relationship, or you only want the sexual aspect of a relationship, both of those are equally valid. Most people want both. I'm one of those people. But if you are somebody that only wants one of the two, that's valid. The important thing is that you find a partner that fits that for you and that you can be happy together.
True. And I hope the conversation goes there, not just from, well, right to sex. It's like, no, sometimes you just want to be held. There are many sex workers who've talked about this, where they'll talk about how many men will pay them and then say, hey, can we just talk? Can we just sit on the bed and talk? And can you just hold me? Can you just... And I think if we have a little more of those conversations, a few more honest conversations, a few more vulnerable conversations, we may get to a place where it's not just about sex or no sex. It's people actually saying, oh yeah, we are full human beings who require a full spectrum of affection and affections towards us. And in the same way, for many years, great therapists have been saying that women have to be allowed to express that they want and enjoy sex. I think we also have to encourage men in society to go, hey, I want to express and enjoy intimacy despite or apart from sex.
See, again, the issue I have is this whole despite or apart. And again, it can be that way, but it could also be included.
And yeah, maybe we can make it happen. What do you think? You have been? Yeah? You can try. Yeah? You can try. Give me a hug. Give me a hug. Give me a hug.
I love you, man. Give me a hug. We're trying to make this natural. Just keep this thing going. That's it, man. I appreciate you, man.
I appreciate it. I love you, man. I love you, man. I love you. I love you.
I want to point out, by the way, that he mentioned in the video earlier that, oh, anytime a man says I love you, it's got to be accompanied or ended with like a bro or dude or man or dog or something like that. You can't just say I love you. And I want to point out that he did the pat on the back with the hug, and he said, I love you, man. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I just think it kind of undermines his point of saying, like, we shouldn't have to do that. And then he goes and does that. I don't know. That's just me. Anyway, I do think that what he said overall is good. I do. I do legitimately. I like his message overall. I agree with his message overall. I just think that some of that language can be used to misunderstand the situation, and especially people who are higher libido, regardless of what their gender identity or sexuality is, that crave emotional and sexual intimacy. I just think that it's important to really have the conversation and understand that that is a spectrum that people can land anywhere on. They can be really high, they can be really low, most people are somewhere in between, and all of it is valid. As always, though, these are just my thoughts. Let me know what yours are in the comments down below. Follow me on social media for more. Subscribe and ring the bell to stay up to date. Leave a like if you like, and if not, I hope you find something to do like. Later, guys. Peace and love.